It was 3:57 a.m. when I decided not to trust my daughter anymore. The kitchen was the same as it had always been. The worn oak table my wife Linda insisted on, the mug with a thin chip at the rim that I still used every morning, the little radio that always caught the morning news. But everything in the house felt off that night. The glow from my laptop cut a pale rectangle across the table. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains were a darker shade of ink. I moved the cursor, navigated to each account, each policy, each retirement form, and one by one I changed the names. I removed beneficiaries. I rerouted access. I clicked submit, closed the laptop, and listened to the silence. I didn't sleep after that. I had done something no father imagines doing. I erased the person I thought would inherit everything. My name is Thomas Sullivan. I'm 64. I served 2 tours in Vietnam, came home, married the best woman I ever knew, and carved out a quiet life in Asheville. I lost Linda 6 years ago to a slow illness. We had 2 children, Michael, our son, who died young in an accident, and Rachel, our daughter, who used to drive 3 hours every Sunday just to bring a pot of her mother's stew. After Michael died, Rachel and Linda leaned on each other in ways I couldn't. For a while it felt like the parts of my family that remained were all woven together tighter because of that loss. Cameron, Michael's boy, was the bright piece that kept me going some days. He used to call me Pa and tell me about baseball. He would crash at my house sometimes and eat cereal for dinner because he'd rather stay up and watch the game with me than go to bed. Those memories matter. They matter because they make the later part hurt worse. It matters because betrayal is measured not just in money, but in the space where trust used to live. Rachel could be delightfully stubborn and fiercely practical. She had a laugh like her mother. She went to trade school, married Kyle, who used to run a small construction outfit. For years, things were ordinary. There were visits, birthdays, Father's Day cards. Then, 2 winters after Linda died, Rachel's voice on the phone shifted. It wasn't the nervousness of a daughter asking for help. It was a different tone entirely. Urgent, clipped, a little rehearsed. "Dad," she said that Wednesday night, "we're in trouble. The business collapsed. The bank's about to foreclose." The sentence landed like a stone in clear water. She explained the mess as people do. Missed payroll, a subcontractor who skipped town, an injured employee. Kyle's voice was steady in the background when he spoke, which made it worse. There was talk of a loan, an eviction notice, the kids at risk. She said they needed a place to regroup while Kyle got things sorted. She asked to move into the little guest cottage on my property for a while. She wouldn't be a burden, she promised. She said, "We'll help around the house. We'll pay rent when we can." I am a man who believes in family first. I thought of Linda's pictures on the mantel, of how she would have insisted we take them in, not turn them away. It felt like the right thing to do. I thought about Cameron's safety and the look on Rachel's face when she explained it. Besides, they were only going to be there for a season. At first it was exactly what they said. Rachel brought groceries. She cleaned the oven without being asked, washed the curtains that had been sitting 6 months. She organized my medicine cabinet, made a list of what I took and when. She showed concern about my walking, helped me up the steps after I came back from the Veterans Center. Those were the things she did that reassured me. Those were also the things that camouflaged what came next. The first odd thing I noticed was the photos. Rachel started taking pictures, not casual snapshots, but careful images of the house. The safe built into the closet, the wall of old tax documents, the stack of insurance paperwork. She would say, "Just in case, Dad, for when you can't find something." She'd set her phone on the table and angle it like an accountant. I remember the first time I asked why she was photographing the ledger from my business years ago, and she laughed it off. "Memory, Dad, for when you want to make a scrapbook." The laugh didn't hit right. Then came the mail. Envelopes that used to pile in the brass holder by the door, mortgage statements, bank letters, policy notices, began to end up in different places. I would find them opened and sitting on the kitchen counter with a receipt on top. When I asked, Rachel would say she had already taken care of something, that she had called my bank to straighten an issue. I have always trusted her to help with small things, but there is a difference between helping and taking. One afternoon, Rachel brought a packet of forms and left them on my chair. My name was at the top of each. The forms appeared to be for power of attorney and for beneficiary changes. There were boxes already checked. There were stark, clean lines where a lawyer's script was supposed to be. On a small sticky note, someone had written in block letters, Rachel Fletcher, primary. She said they were part of simplifying things, a way to make sure the bills were paid, that nothing fell through the cracks. She insisted I see a lawyer later that week, and she had already penciled in a date. When a grown child starts writing the date for your legal appointments, you should be on your toes. I called Benjamin Hart. Ben had been my lawyer for 30 years. He knew Linda, knew Michael, knew the way I liked my estate structured. You ask a man like that a question and you pay for experience in honesty. I told him about the packet and the sticky note and the pre-filled lines. He didn't say, let them do it. He asked me calmly what kind of power of attorney was on the form. Immediate effect, I said. He paused for a long breath. That's the one to be careful with, Ben said. Plain, solid. He explained that an immediate effect power of attorney gives the agent the ability to act on your behalf the moment you sign. There are versions that kick in only if you become incapacitated. Those are safer for someone who wants control to remain with them until they are truly unable. If you sign an immediate one, you could be signing away access to your accounts the same day, Ben said. I tell you this because the language sounded almost impossibly clinical for something that felt like handing over a part of myself. Ben walked me through scenarios, how payments could be rerouted, how a bank might accept a new signature card, how beneficiaries could be changed if someone had the right legal paper or the right excuse. He didn't frighten me with horror stories. He told me things I needed to know. He told me to take my time. You would think that would be enough. But there is a dynamic in families, especially where it concerns an aging parent and the adult child who steps in to help. The one who helps can feel justified. The one who gets helped can feel grateful and gaslit at the same time when boundaries shift. Rachel and Kyle settled into the cottage. They were close, but not living in the main house. That didn't stop Rachel from helping more and more. She created a master spreadsheet of my finances, account names and last 4 digits, and asked if she could log in to simplify monthly payments. She would stand over my shoulder while I typed passwords, offering to take care of it. She would occasionally make a comment about how easy it would be to get everything in order with one signature. The small things accumulated. A prescription I didn't remember picking up was in the medicine cabinet. My checkbook would have a new deposit noted that I could not place. A phone call to my Medicare line was answered by Rachel in a way that made the agent assume I had authorized her. It was the kind of slow, careful movement that looks like concern until it becomes control. I tried to question it gently. "Are you making those calls for me?" I asked one morning over coffee. "I can do it myself." "Oh, Dad," she said almost sweetly. "You don't need to worry about that. Let me handle it so you don't have to do the paperwork." It sounded right. Her voice had the cadence of love. It also had the cadence of someone who had rehearsed this role. By the time the sticky note reappeared on a different pile of papers, this one with the bold letters next to a photocopied form that had Rachel's name on it, I was as uneasy as I'd ever been. There were things missing from the house, original insurance policies, a small ring Linda had given me the week we married. When I mentioned the ring to Rachel, she shrugged and said she had seen it in a box when she was cleaning. Later, I found a photograph on her phone of the inside of the bedside table where the ring had been. She had snapped the picture from an angle that showed where the jewelry box sat. The ring was not in the shot. The photograph looked like an inventory. I reached out to a woman I had met at a veterans group, Patricia Morales. Patricia had worked in the Bureau for years and had recently set up a private investigation business helping elders who worried about exploitation. I was hesitant to call a PI on my daughter. What man wants to live with that decision? But there is a difference between suspicion and action, and I needed help to see the line clearly. Patricia came by one afternoon, the kind of person who sizes up a house with a look and hears the story before a word is spoken. She sat at my kitchen table and listened while I explained, careful not to judge. She looked at the forms, at the photos on Rachel's phone, at the uneven stack of opened mail sitting where the brass holder used to be. She nodded when I mentioned the immediate effect POA. "This is textbook," she said, and she didn't say it like a headline. She said it softly, like confirming a pattern she had seen before. She explained the signs of financial exploitation, the pre-filled forms, the urgency, the isolation of the elder from other supports, the quick push to change legal documents. She talked about how adult children can rationalize their actions, how spouses can be complicit out of fear or need. Her words landed like the pages of a report. Patricia recommended steps. She didn't tell me to do anything illegal. She told me to secure important documents, to retrieve original policies, to change passwords, to consult Ben about revoking or refusing any documents I had not signed of my own volition. She explained that in North Carolina, one-party consent to a recording is legal, meaning that if I participated in a conversation, a recording I made could be admissible, but she emphasized consulting counsel first. She had seen people record themselves without a lawyer and get into trouble. She had seen others gather evidence carefully with legal guidance and build a case. "I won't tell you how to record," she said. "I'll tell you how to do this so it's useful if you have to act. And we'll do it right. We'll document the chain. We'll keep everything above board." Those were the kind of instructions that feel like a heavy, sensible hand. They were also terrifying. The very thought that you might need to record your own child felt like a betrayal in itself. I kept picturing Linda's face, softer than grief, asking me if I had done the right thing. Sometimes doing the right thing looks like a small, sharp instrument cutting away the part of your life that hurts. That evening, I sat in the same chair where I had signed mortgage papers years ago and thought about trust. Trust is a ledger of small deposits, and sometimes it can be drained in a few precise withdrawals. The quiet in the house pressed in. I could hear Rachel laughing in the cottage. I imagined her arranging documents on the kitchen table with the same deliberate calm she had displayed when she brought over those forms. I imagined the sticky note again, her name in block letters. I called Ben and told him what Patricia had said. He came by the next morning, and we sat in the living room with the pictures she'd taken and the pre-filled forms. He didn't say the words crime lightly. He said instead, document everything. Cancel automatic account access if you didn't authorize it. Put a hold on transfers where possible. Change passwords. Don't sign anything until we've reviewed it. He said not to cut Rachel out without giving her an opportunity to explain, to keep the legal measures measured and purposeful. My head kept returning to small, personal things, like whether Cameron would understand when the family changed, if he'd even be in my life. His presence had always been a tether. Rachel had been the bridge between me and him in many ways. As these cracks appeared, I felt that bridge wobble. Then came the night that pushed me over the edge. I had gone to bed after a long day and woken in the middle of it, restless. I remember glancing at the clock, at the dark window, at the moonlight making a pale path on the floor. There was a sound of conversation drifting through the hallway from the cottage. I couldn't place why I was awake, only that I couldn't sleep until I knew. I walked down the hall. The cottage door was open, and I heard Rachel and Kyle talking. Kyle's tone was low, practical. Rachel's contained that rehearsed urgency again. I stood in the doorway. She didn't see me. I should have walked away. I should have closed the door and kept my dignity. Instead, I listened. There was a phrase she used that I turned over later like a coin. Get him evaluated. I know now how that sounds in the cold light of recorded evidence. At the time, I went back to bed carrying a new weight, something I couldn't quite name. The next day, I told Patricia. She listened without surprise. Have you gotten anything in writing? She asked. No, I said. Not yet. Then get your documents together, she said. Get Ben on record, and be careful. If they are moving toward having you declared unable, they might push for a doctor who will say what they need. I'd like to sit in on the next conversations if you'll have me. We began to gather. It felt like building a little perimeter around my life. Ben wrote a letter to the bank explaining that I wouldn't sign any power of attorney without his review. Patricia started to take photos of the visible documents she could find and made a log. We changed passwords and placed originals of life insurance policies in a safety deposit box. I felt like a man doing housework on his own life. It was practical and cold and necessary. The more we documented, the more the evidence seemed to fall into place. There were phone records showing calls to my accounts that I had no memory of authorizing. There were receipts that Rachel had on hand for payments I had not made. There were the photographs from her phone of drawers that had previously held jewelry and documents. Each item, taken alone, might have been an accident. Together, they drew a pattern that Patricia recognized. People mistake this for ordinary family friction, she said. But when someone is systematically consolidating access and control, and there's an immediate effect instrument ready, that's not friction, that's intent. I won't lie. Receiving that diagnosis felt like being blamed for my own vulnerability. I kept thinking I should have seen it sooner. I should have guarded Linda's old ring more carefully. I should have been more suspicious of the way Rachel held a pen poised over a form. Regret is a particular shade of acid. One evening, after a week of quiet, I sat at the kitchen table and listened to a short recording that Patricia had recommended I make. The recording captured a conversation where Rachel, thinking I agreed, said, "We need to get him evaluated. Get the paperwork in order and then we can access accounts." The recording was short, barely a dozen seconds. It was, in a way, everything I needed to hear to label what I was feeling. There are ways to get at the truth without destroying the person who is lying to you. There are ways to preserve your own dignity while collecting facts. Patricia and Ben taught me that. They also taught me the importance of a careful chain of custody for anything we might use later. If this ever became a legal fight, every email, every photo, every recorded phrase would need to be accounted for. That is the mechanical side of justice. The other side was uglier. The knowledge that my daughter had spoken as if she could declare me unable and move to take control. The choice I made that night at 3:57 a.m. was not only about money, it was about autonomy. It was about deciding in the small hours that I would not let someone else decide for me without my say. It was about preserving the right to be my own person until I could no longer be so by clear medical definition, not by someone else's urgency. After the changes, Rachel noticed. She made a small joke about my new digital security. Her laugh sounded thinner. I watched for a reaction. She asked why I had done it. I told her I was being careful. She didn't press, but later that week a conversation I had with Kyle in the backyard carried the soft gravity of plans changing. There was a line, again, later captured in a short audio clip, where Kyle said, "We can always make it work. The funds are there if we move them first." I didn't like the way his words settled, even though I wasn't certain what he meant. Was he talking about taking risks? Moving assets? I couldn't be sure. What I could be sure about was the pattern. People say these things never happen in their family. They think elder abuse is something that happens in other people's neighborhoods, to people whose stoop isn't familiar. I'm telling you now because it's not remote. It's near. It sits at the kitchen table. We started to plan. Not revenge, not escalation. Planning like you plan a garden after frost, with tools, with light, with perspective. Ben told me not to confront rashly. Patricia told me we needed clear, documented evidence if we ever intended to involve adult protective services or law enforcement. She explained that evidence taken without care could undermine the whole case. Do this the right way, she said, because if you don't, you'll lose twice, your money and your credibility. It is a strange thing to consider the possibility of sending your own child papers with legal consequences. I reminded myself over and over that families are complicated, that motives are tangled up with desperation. Rachel had reason to be desperate, Kyle had reason to be desperate, but desperation doesn't justify crossing a line that strips a person of their rights. There were nights I wanted to call Rachel and just ask, what is going on? There were other nights I wanted to storm into the cottage and take back every paper and throw them in the river. But the lawyer and the PI urged measured action. So we worked in long, slow arcs. Documentation, conversation, professional advice. By the middle of that month, Patricia had catalogued a clear list of suspicious actions. She had photographs of mail opened and set aside, a timeline of who had access to certain accounts, and notes about the pre-filled forms. Ben had written to the bank and to my insurance companies, advising them to contact him first if any changes were requested. I changed my passwords and placed originals into the bank's safe deposit box. I took Linda's ring and put it in a place even Rachel's photos couldn't reach. All of it felt small and enormous at the same time. It felt like reassembling a house after a storm. It felt like locking the front door after someone had been inside. That was where we stood when the first real fragment of recorded evidence came to me. The short clip of Rachel saying words that could be interpreted as arranging for me to be declared unable. When I played it back that first time, my hands shook. Not because of the content alone, but because I was listening to my own life as if through a stranger's radio. The voice that said, "We should get him evaluated," belonged to my daughter. I recognized the impatience in it. I recognized the practicality. I recognized underneath the logic that makes people justify the unjust. I don't want to overstate the moment. It was not some Hollywood revelation. There was no dramatic lighting, no thunderclap. It was a small file on my laptop. It was a dozen seconds that repatterned how I would live the rest of my life. It was the pivot point. It compelled me to act. It prepared me to build a case that, if I had to, I could show to people who had the authority to step in and protect me. That is where this part of the story ends, with a man sitting at a table in the pre-dawn, watching the last of his life rearranged into a folder. The evidence was modest, but real. The professionals were advising careful next steps. The emotional cost was beginning to show. The Friday visits stopped being easy. Cameron's calls grew shorter. Rachel's laughter carried a new edge. If you're still with me, stay a little longer. There are marks to watch for, and pieces of this story I need to tell you so that you might see them before they grow. We tightened the circle. Patricia had a way of moving through my house like a surgeon. Careful, deliberate, noting where things were soft and where they were hard. She recommended we not rush to confront Rachel without a controlled situation. She wanted statements we could verify, moments we could timestamp, and witnesses who could testify to what they heard in the room. Ben agreed. Confrontation without counsel and corroboration would be a mistake. So we built a small plan together that felt less like revenge and more like a protective maneuver. We invited Rachel and Kyle to dinner at the main house one Saturday evening. The invitation was casual. There was a birthday to celebrate for a neighbor, an old recipe I said I wanted to try. The goal, Ben told me, was to create a natural space where conversation could be recorded with appropriate legal guidance in place. Patricia and Ben arranged the logistics. Detective James Warren agreed to be on standby to advise if the recordings produced clear evidence of criminal intent. Sarah Chen from Adult Protective Services said she would receive materials if a report was needed. I remember thinking about the number of adults in that room and how, in a single night, our private home would feel a little like a courtroom. I practiced being small and forgetful for days. It wasn't me pretending to be something I wasn't. It was a deliberate, careful act designed to evoke the exact rhetoric Rachel had used before. Ben advised me to be consistent, not to play a role that was cruel, but to be credible. Patricia left a recorder in the room, in a place where someone participating in the conversation would be legally within their rights to record. We kept everything by the book. Counsel present, chain of custody planned, notes logged. There are ways to gather truth without stepping over the edge. And that was what we tried to do. When they arrived, Rachel hugged me the way she always had. Her touch felt colder to me than it once did, not because she had changed in one day, but because the lens through which I saw her had changed. We sat at the table. The candles flamed low. The cottage felt a world away. I remember the sound of forks on plates, the neighbor's old dog snoring in the corner, the soft recorded hiss from a device that would, in time, become our most trustable witness. We talked about ordinary things. Kyle cracked a joke about a roofing job gone sideways. Rachel asked about my walking boot. I answered with small talk, and then, as we always seem to do in families, we grazed closer to money before someone noticed. Ben steered the conversation lightly toward the practicalities of estate planning, and that was the moment I let myself be the man who needed guidance. I spoke slowly about the paperwork Rachel had left, how I preferred things to be done with counsel. Rachel nodded and said something about streamlining again. In the recording later, her tone was that same rehearsed cadence. It had become a pattern. At some point, the conversation moved beyond hypotheticals. There was a moment where Rachel, perhaps impatient, spoke in the kind of frank way one uses when they're convinced of their own rightness. I heard the words on the playback weeks later and felt the same confusion then as I do now, part hurt, part astonishment. She talked about getting things organized, and someone, it might have been Kyle, suggested a route that involved an evaluation and a doctor's letter that could make the paperwork simpler. Ben asked a few neutral questions, and Rachel responded in a way that suggested she genuinely believed she was doing the sensible thing, which only made it worse. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and the neighborhood dog's tail thumped contentedly against a rug, Rachel and Kyle moved to the living room to talk quietly about logistics, or so they thought. The recorder captured them discussing names of doctors, the timeline for paperwork, and an offhand remark about moving funds once the paperwork is in hand. I have not repeated the raw recording to friends or neighbors. The few lines we played to Detective Warren were short, edited for clarity and accompanied by our notes. Detective Warren's expression didn't change much. He was a professional. But when he asked for the files and the timeline, he did say, "This is actionable. We'll open an inquiry." What Patricia had always explained was that patterns matter more than single sentences. One line in a bad moment could be explained away. A string of small actions made a story. We had pictures of opened mail, a timeline of calls to my bank that I hadn't authorized, a list of forms with Rachel's name pre-filled, and recorded conversations where she and Kyle considered getting medical support for the purpose of gaining access. That mosaic of facts is what convinces authorities to look closer. The morning after the dinner, Detective Warren and an officer called me in to confirm what we had collected. They had questions about dates, about whether I had been pressured into signing anything, about who had access to my passwords. Ben provided the letter he'd written to the banks. Patricia gave them the photographic timeline. Sarah from APS asked gentle, essential questions about my capacity to manage day-to-day affairs and whether there had been coercion. Those interviews are not dramatic. They are bureaucratic and tedious and necessary. Paperwork and patience do more toward protection than bluster ever does. Within a few days, formal actions were underway. The bank placed flags on my accounts that required Ben's direct authorization for changes. Insurance companies required written confirmation from Ben before any beneficiary changes were considered. APS opened an inquiry. The police opened an investigation. Each step was, in its way, a small restoration of control. Rachel and Kyle were served a cease and desist letter. Ben delivered it personally and read it aloud in the doorway while Patricia and I stood a few steps back. I remember Rachel's face when she saw the page, a mixture of anger and something like panic. She accused me briefly and loudly of being paranoid. She called me cruel for bringing strangers into our home. The neighbors heard the edge in her voice. The dog that had been sleeping lifted its head as if noticing the shift. I expected a single showdown. What followed was slower and quieter, calls that became less frequent, excuses that disappeared into silence. There was an odd, rupturing hush. The family fracturing didn't look like a movie break, but like winter settling over a pond. Cameron's visits, once a weekly light, dwindled. At first I told myself he was busy, or that his parents were protecting him. Then the calls shortened, then stopped. I have wondered, often and painfully, whether he felt he had to choose sides, or whether he was simply being shielded from an ugly truth. Legal processes do not unfold at cinematic speed. Months passed. Detective Warren interviewed witnesses, collected bank logs, and spoke to the doctor Rachel had mentioned, who denied any arrangement that would declare someone incapable without proper examinations. Patricia assisted by compiling a detailed, dated file of actions that suggested intent rather than accident. Pre-filled forms, photos of documents in spaces they didn't belong, notes indicating a plan to change beneficiaries. Ben filed a civil complaint requesting, in part, an accounting of any funds that had been moved and seeking an injunction to prevent further changes to my estate. That injunction gave me immediate relief. It didn't fix the brokenness, but it built a wall. Eventually, formal criminal charges were brought. I was careful with my language when I spoke about it to neighbors, because nothing about the law is certain until a judge says so. Charges were filed alleging financial exploitation and related counts. In the months that followed, plea negotiations took place. I sat through 2 court hearings. Ben, calm as ever, guided me through what to say and when to say it. The case did not explode in headlines. Rachel did not go to prison. She accepted a plea deal that included restitution, probation, and counseling, along with a no-contact provision that prevented her from coming to my house or contacting me directly. Kyle received similar terms. I am not calling that justice in any simplistic sense. People have varied ideas of what justice looks like, and mine is tempered by the gap between the return of money and the return of a daughter. The restitution helped recover some financial losses that had occurred during the months of manipulation. It didn't recover the Sunday dinners, the easy laughter, the habit of walking together down to the Veterans Center. It didn't knit back the trust I'd once had. What it did do was send a clear message that certain behaviors have consequences and that institutions can be persuaded, with careful documentation and counsel, to intervene. The civil case that Ben brought was separate. Civil court moved at its own painful pace, but it gave a forum to demand a formal accounting and to seek a legal order preventing future transfers that might occur through proxies or allied accounts. Again, I will not promise outcomes for anyone who finds themselves in similar shoes. Every case is different, and the law is a forest dense with paths. What matters is the method. Document, consult, act with counsel, and insist that institutions respect the safeguards you put in place. There were days when I would sit and count the small, practical ways my life had to change. I stopped leaving my checkbook on the table. I checked the mail before anyone could touch it. I updated passwords and put originals of key documents into a safe deposit box under Ben's watch. I told the Veterans Center to contact Ben if anything unusual cropped up. I wrote a letter to Cameron, mailed it with a hand-signed note, asking only that he read it, simply and without pressure. He wrote back once, a short note that said he missed me. That was enough to keep me awake some nights, trying to imagine how to be present in his life without forcing him. The emotional cost sits somewhere between grief and relief. I have more control than I did at 3:57 a.m., and yet the house is quieter. Rachel's face at the courthouse, when we passed in a hallway and she wouldn't meet my eyes, is an image I still carry. I don't take a perverse pleasure in her punishment. That would be a hollow thing. I remember Linda's laugh more and more. I remember Michael's quick grin. Those are the things that sustain me now. So what did I learn in the currency of regret and practical sense? I am not offering a legal primer, only a set of steps that for me reduced my vulnerability. First, know where your documents are. Know who has copies. If you have policies or deed papers, keep originals in 2 secure locations and tell a trusted lawyer where they are. Second, keep an inventory. A dated list of accounts, policies, and the last 4 digits of account numbers with a note of who is authorized is invaluable. Third, control access to passwords and devices. Change them if something feels off. Fourth, be cautious with immediate effect powers of attorney. Consider a durable POA that only activates under specific medical criteria, and make sure an independent lawyer drafts and reviews such instruments. Fifth, if you feel pressured, document it. Dates, calls, photos, and consult professionals before confronting someone. Ben, Patricia, Detective Warren, and Sarah from APS were the hands that guided me through this. Their presence made sure that every action we took could be corroborated. There is also a softer lesson, one that doesn't sit in a lawyer's brief. There is dignity in setting boundaries, even with people you love. Autonomy in old age is a fragile thing. It requires vigilance and, sometimes, the willingness to choose guardrails over convenience. Saying no to someone who offers to take care of things is not a betrayal, it is an act of self-respect. That doesn't make the loneliness easier. It only gives shape to it. Friends were remarkable in ways that mattered. Frank, the former federal judge, offered more than platitudes. He listened to my indignation and reminded me to think long-term. Small kindnesses count. A neighbor mowing my lawn when I couldn't, a church member dropping off a casserole, Patricia showing up with a file folder that could prove a theory. The community matters not because they take legal steps, those are for professionals, but because they provide perspective and ballast when your world tips. Cameron came back eventually. It was slow and awkward, a series of text messages that turned into a few visits and then a summer barbecue. He was quiet at first, shaky around the edges. I never forced him to talk about what happened. I only tried to be available for him, unjudging. He was a boy when his father died and is a young man now. He had to process adult choices made by adults he loved. I didn't expect him to forgive overnight. I don't think he ever fully will. Forgiveness is not a box you check, it's a road you walk. The house, in time, felt less like a crime scene and more like a place where life was still possible. I returned to rituals, the mug with the chip, the radio, the steps to the back deck. The first time I sat on that deck after everything calmed, the mountains had their same patient look. The morning coffee steamed, the air smelled of pine and the faint chemical tang of the neighbor's grill. I thought then, oddly, of the smallness of the click I had made at 3:57 a.m. It had been a moment of clarity more than vindictiveness. It had been a refusal to hand over the keys without a hearing. If there's one thing I hope those who've stayed with me take away, it's this. Vigilance is love. You can love and still protect yourself. You can listen and still ask for documentation. You can invite family into your life and insist on boundaries that preserve your dignity. If you sense pressure to sign, ask for time. Consult an independent lawyer. Keep records. Reach out to professionals who understand elder exploitation. Social services, the police, and private investigators helped me in ways that felt respectful and necessary. There is no shame in using them. I learned, too, to let go of the yearning for a tidy reconciliation. Some doors do not reopen, and living with that is its own kind of work. It is honest to admit the ache that remains. It is also honest to admit that the ache is preferable to the alternative of being removed from the life I had built without due process. Before I close, a practical note I will offer gently. Review beneficiary designations regularly. Many transfers bypass wills and go straight to the accounts named on forms. Keeping those up to date and in counsel's hands can prevent surprises. Tell a trusted attorney about any forms left by relatives. If someone brings paperwork with boxes already checked, pause. Ask why those boxes were checked before you sign. Small bureaucratic acts often have large human consequences. The morning ritual remains. The back deck holds my coffee mug, the chipped edge catching light just so. Sometimes when the sky is a soft blue and the house is still, I think about the moment that changed everything. It wasn't cinematic. It was, in the simplest way, necessary. I had to choose between preserving the life I had built and allowing someone else, even my child, to redirect it on what appeared to be their timetable. If this story touches you, if it stirs a recognition or worry, share it with someone you trust. Tell a lawyer, call your local adult protective services, or speak with a counselor. If you are watching and you have a story like mine, write it down. There is power in the record. There is also power in community. The early morning revelation at 3:57 a.m. did, in the end, change everything. It saved me from losing not only money, but a measure of my agency. It cost me family. It cost me easy evenings and unexamined trust. But it left me with a quieter, steadier life where my decisions, for better or worse, remain my own. If any of this resonates, if you are worried about a parent or your own choices, reach out. Tell your story to a trusted lawyer or a local agency. Take the small steps before urgency becomes coercion. I make my coffee now and sit on the back deck. The mountains are still there, slow and patient. I breathe, and in that breath I find a way to be both careful and open. I still miss what was lost. I will probably miss it always. But I am here, and that counts. The early morning revelation changed everything, and it taught me that one's last years can be protected without losing one's dignity. Disclaimer: these stories are made up, created for dramatic purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons or events is accidental. Subscribe now to Aun Peters Stories YT and join a community that values powerful stories, deep emotions, and life lessons that truly matter.